Hello, dear ones. Father Peter John coming to you from All Saints Orthodox Church, Bloomington, Indiana. Christ is in our midst. I want to talk to you about one final fool for Christ, Saint Xenia of Petersburg. Many have wondered, why in the world haven't you talked about Saint Xenia yet? Well, it's one of these kind of saving the best for last. Not that she's the best saint, but that her story is perhaps one of the most compelling. She was a young woman married to a military officer, and her husband died tragically and unexpectedly at a party when she was 26 years old. She took the news very hard. She was obviously very, very concerned that he died partying instead of having gone to confession, made a self-reflection and prepared himself and received communion and all these things that we hope to be able to do before we breathe our last on this side of the veil. Well, while there are some differing reports on exactly what Saint Xenia did immediately following her husband's death, one of them, and the one I'm just going to posit to you, says that she gave away everything that she had, including her home, by the way. The only stipulation on giving her home away, that's a mosquito. The only stipulation was that whoever lived in the home had to open that home for those who were poor and needy. Give a home to the homeless, in other words. So Saint Xenia then, after she gave away all of her possessions, the only thing that she kept was her husband's military coat. And she disappeared into a monastery for a period of about 8 years. The place where this differs is some people say she went home on the streets first for a while and then disappeared. It doesn't matter. The point is, she went into a monastery for a period of 8 years, and when she came out wearing her husband's coat, she would only allow herself to be called by his name, and she spent the rest of her life doing good deeds in his name, wanting to honor her husband who had departed this life. So Saint Xenia then, she became a homeless wanderer in St. Petersburg. Her approach to people was one of prayerfulness. She would stay up all night praying. At first, people were a little bit kind of put off and frightened, I think. But once they started to realize who Saint Xenia was, even though she acted somewhat foolish and used a man's name and wore her dead husband's coat, they started to realize that it was actually a great blessing if she walked by their house. Sometimes she would be found standing outside someone's gate praying for them on the sidewalk outside their house. And then some sorts of great blessings would follow. Healings, somebody finding a job that they really needed, etc. Well, so this is the way Saint Xenia lived her life. One of the great stories that I love is that there was a chapel being built in Smolensk Cemetery. And it was a brick chapel, and so the workers would work and they would toil during the day, and then the sun would go down, they would go home, and then Saint Xenia would do her part. We're told that she would take bricks and she would haul them up to where they needed to be in order that in the morning when the workmen arrived, they didn't have to spend time hauling bricks. They could just take them from where she had deposited them and continue to stack them and thus finish the chapel much faster. Saint Xenia lived until her early 70s, working countless miracles. One other of my favorite, just because it involves coffee, forgive me and indulge me, but there was one case where there was a woman who was sitting in her house, and Saint Xenia knocked on the door, and she came. They invited her in. She came in and she looked at this woman. She said, "You sit here drinking coffee while your husband is burying his first wife?" And of course, this was extremely confusing to everybody. But the woman that she visited ended up marrying this man who, at that very day, at that very moment, was burying his first wife who had died of an illness. So anyway, Saint Xenia was buried at that same Smolensk monastery where she had built this chapel. And the soil, the dirt over her grave, people would take it and they could bring it to people who were sick, and when they touched the dirt, they were healed. So many pilgrims started coming and flocking to her grave and taking the dirt that every year they had to refill the grave with fresh dirt. So what they finally did was they built a chapel over her grave, and so people couldn't come and get the dirt anymore, because I think they were kind of annoyed by having to refill it every year. Anyway, we still ask St. Xenia for her prayers. This woman who left everything behind for the sake of Christ, spent her life praying to the Lord and interceding for the soul of her husband. That same St. Xenia, we ask her to pray for us. Christ is in our midst. He is and ever shall be.